I've been a park ranger for 6 years now, and I'll never forget the time we found that skinwalker nest. After all this time, I just hope that they haven't made another one. I've hunted for kids in the deep woods of Appalachian National Park. I've blown up beaver dams and watched the residents scatter and panic. I've seen hikers trapped on mountainsides. Kids go missing inside of campgrounds with cameras everywhere. And I've heard lots of strange sounds while out in the woods. I've killed rabid bears. I've seen deer with strange tumors that are little more than zombies. I've even encountered those disembodied stares that people keep talking about on the internet. None of that prepared me for what was to come. So I started with the Forestry Service right out of high school, and I was with the Scouts my whole life. I'd learned a lot of skills over the years that would serve me well in the woods. I could identify local animals and a variety of edible plants. Pretty good at finding trails and keeping my bearings in the woods. I was also on the shotgun team, even without experience. The Forestry Service was glad to give me a shot. After a lengthy hiring process, they hired me as a junior ranger. Play your cards right, kid, and you can easily become a full-fledged ranger at the end of the year, the recruiter had told me. I was excited by the prospect, and the next 6 months just flew by. I was mostly responsible for traveling the park with Ranger Wade. Now, Ranger Wade is an interesting guy. He's a 15-year vet who'd seen damn near everything. He was one of those guys who could be 30 or 50 depending on what time of day you saw him. And he was quick with that ain't nothing, kid. Let me tell you about this one kind of talk story. I worked in a group with him, Ranger Herb, Junior Ranger Gage, and Junior Ranger Frank. The five of us cleared trails, gave out directions, and looked for people who got lost in the woods. I hadn't lost anyone yet, and Ranger Wade often said that I was their lucky charm. Our group found more kids, more lost hikers, and more dangerous animals than any of the other ranger circles. We became the go-to circle for hard assignments. That's how we got mixed up with the disappearances that spring. My first winter with the park. It was a hard one, but as spring came, we got ready for everything that brought. The bears would be waking up, and the plants would be coming to life. The ice would be breaking on the streams, and the campers and hikers would be back and forth. I was glad for the warmth. I still wasn't quite sure that two of my left-hand fingers would ever work the same again, but most of our work had been keeping paths clear, and keeping the few guests we had from sliding off the side of the trail. The first month, however, was when I lost my first lost hiker. The poor guy got caught in a freak blizzard and we didn't get to him in time. We searched out in the snow for hours, but when we came across him, I kind of wish we hadn't. His campsite wasn't set for the extreme cold, and as it got there, we already guessed what we would find. Too bad, Ranger Wade breathed, his breath steaming from his muffler. They never checked the weather report, and then they pay the price. Wade, Herb said, pointing to the snow. I'm not sure the cold is our biggest concern right now. There was something bright in the fresh powder. The closer to the campsite we got, the easier it was to see the blood trail. Something had left long scratches of gore across the snow, as if something didn't like the way the gore clung to its claws and washed them off in the snow. Wade stepped in a breath, coughing as the cold air filled his lungs. He then told Herb to take Gage and Frank and follow the blood trail. Now don't get too close, Wade told the guys. If it's a pissed-off bear, then we'll get someone out here to take care of it. Me and Tonto here will check the campsite to see if the poor guy is still alive. You sure? Herb asked dubiously. If it's not a bear, Wade cut him off. If it ain't a bear, then we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. Now go scout while the kid and I are here and get to work. Reluctantly, the three moved off to follow the trail. That left the two of us to check the campsite. And it was a bloodbath. And the cold had nothing to do with this guy's death. He was splayed out by his campfire. His frozen stew spread across the ground as he just stared blankly at the frozen sky. His legs were still sitting on the log. They were frozen in place as the rest of him lay on the ground. Something had cut him in half, and his innards were hard and dark as they spilled out of him. He'd been dressed for the weather. Clearly, he hadn't checked the weather reports after all. But his thick coat, it hadn't saved him in the least. The coat had been torn easily, and the feathers within had either been blown away or gotten frozen in the gore. Wade sighed deeply. Damn it. I started looking around. I was taking it all in and forming conclusions based on what I saw. The conclusions, however, were a little strange. If this was a bear attack, then the bear was clearly rabid. He'd passed up the stew, the food in the nearby cooler, and the hanging garbage shack that the hiker had hung up. Rabid or not, why split the man in half and leave all the meat to rot? The body didn't look like it had been chewed. No bear would have left all that meat behind. It would have likely carried him back to its den, and the blood trail would have been a hell of a lot bigger. What do you see, Tonto? Ranger Wade asked, his sharp eyes taking in everything I had and more. Well, if it's a bear, it's got to be out of its friggin' mind. Looks like it just came in, killed the guy and left. But why would it do that? I ventured. Why indeed, Wade said, looking back the way we'd come. All right, let's go. I want to make sure the others haven't found anything they can't handle. As we left the camp, I noted its location so we could send emergency services up here. We found our guys' tracks easily. You know much about this part, kid? Wade asked, pulling down his muffler so he could shoot a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. Yeah, it was probably native land before the government set it aside for conservation. I guess correct, he said. But the natives weren't the only things here. The ones in the area still talk about weird creatures that wander the woods sometimes. They take the forms of animals and sometimes people, and they hate the living. I don't know why, but when they encounter a human being in their territory, it almost always ends in tragedy. We get killings like this every now and again, but they are rare, thankfully. I looked at him, trying to see if he was trying to haze me or something. They had got me good at the beginning of October. They told me that a dog man lived in the woods, and if I didn't leave him treats when I went out, he would get me. I am ashamed to say I left dog biscuits by the station every day for a week. When one of them pretended to be a big dog barking one evening, they scared the hell out of me. They all had a good laugh as I ran back to the station. So you can imagine I was pretty hesitant to believe them without proof. Now when I looked at Ranger Wade, however, I could tell he was dead serious about this. So what were these things called? I asked, our feet crunching through the snowy ground as we tracked our comrades. Wade kept moving forward as he talked. The natives in the area have a big, hard-to-pronounce name for them, but they ask that you not use it because they say it draws them to you. We call them skinwalkers, and they're scary enough all on their own without an impressive name. Have you ever seen one? I asked, still not entirely convinced they weren't messing with me. A couple of times, he confessed. But the only time I could confirm it was a skinwalker was one night when we were looking for a lost kid in November. As we crunched along, Wade told me how he'd been searching with his circle for a kid who had gotten lost on a hike. It was cold. The flurries were falling but not sticking, and Wade had gotten separated from his group. They were there 1 minute and gone the next, he said, and as he searched for them, he began to call their names as he called out. He was surprised to hear a kid calling back to him, and he hoped it was the missing kid. He kept calling, the kid yelling back the same 7 words again and again. Help me. Help me. Someone help me, Wade said with a shudder. That had nothing to do with the cold, but it wasn't normal. It had the same words spoken again and again, always in the same way and at the same volume, he said. Wade hadn't noticed at the time, however. He wanted to find the kid. He wanted to be a hero, and as he moved deeper into the woods, the cries started getting closer and closer. Wade was calling back, telling him to stay put, not having a clue that the kid was staying very still. He said we likely wouldn't be having this conversation if he hadn't tripped over something in the dark, and when he looked back, Wade felt his blood run cold. It was the kid, his shirt covered in blood and his face pale. He'd cut his arm. The wound was long and ragged, and he was lying on the ground as he shook in terror. When he looked at me, I could see another cut on his chin. I knew then that whatever this was had been playing with him. I pulled him in close, whispering for him to be quiet and stay still. And all the while, this thing was yelling back in his voice, trying to lure me closer. They had hidden in the bough of a tree. The roots protected them as the voice got closer, trying to coax them out. It had likely figured out that the game was up. It was now trying to strain as much fear from the situation as it could. As the sun set and the shadows gathered, Wade said it had come up on the tree they were hiding beneath, and he saw it clearly for the first time. It looked like a kid, but its skin was gray, and its arms and legs were too long. It was like an adult pretending to be a child, but it was much worse than that. It was like something that isn't human pretending to be one, and I was terrified that it would turn around and see us, Wade said, his voice shaking. The other three came into sight then, and as we approached, I asked what had happened. The two of us spent the night there, and when the flashlights came calling our names, I called out and we were rescued just as dawn broke. I told Ranger Jasper about it, and he suggested that I not tell anyone. There's lots of strange things in the woods, he said. No sense scaring the tourists. I never saw it so close again, but I was always on the lookout after that. Herb came up then, and he told me not to speak of it anymore. Herb pointed to the cliff face, and he said that was where the tracks ended. It was as if whatever it had been had jumped into the ravine, but there was nothing at the bottom. It was like it had sprouted wings and flown away, but that was even less likely. He nodded when he heard the hiker was dead, but he bit his lip when he heard how he died. Okay, all right, we gotta call this in. Let's get back to the station and see what HQ has to say, Herb said. Wade nodded, and the five of us set off. The snow melted 2 days later, but it was far from the last killing in the park. Some of them just went missing, but others were found torn apart within their campsites. A month later, we were up to 10 disappearances and 12 ride-out slangs, the public was told. That it was a rabid bear or bears with cubs that people had gotten too close to. But I don't think anyone believed it. The way the bodies were mangled, it was beyond anything an animal could manage. The arms were pulled out of their sockets, the faces were skinned back, the eyes were removed, and they were found elsewhere in the body. And parts of the victim's anatomy, they were simply missing, just to name a few. All the killings were horrific, and the longer it went on, the more the upper breath. Us began to lean on Wade to do something. Finally, as I came in one morning, Wade told me to go pack a lunch and get ready for a long day. He was cleaning shotguns at the break room table, and I could see something else leaning against the wall, something that made me nervous. It wasn't really a flamethrower, even though that's what we called it. We used it to clear stubborn brush tangles or start controlled fires. I only seen Wade use it a handful of times. The fuel for it was very expensive, and as such he was the only one permitted to use it for work-related matters. Whatever we were doing today was clearly something that constituted a work matter. Big plans today, boss? I asked, seeing Gage and Herb already making sandwiches in the break room. Frank's likely driving in, since it was his day off. The biggest, he said, looking through the barrel before sliding the action forward. We're going to get to the thing that is terrorizing the park. I was speechless. You know where it is. All in due time, Tano. Now, go get your sandwiches made and get ready for a long day in the field. Half an hour later, when Franks came in looking half asleep, Wade decided to begin. Wade had likely not slept the night before. So when he wheeled in a whiteboard with a map taped to it, Fern looked at him sourly. He'd clearly been obsessing over this for days. Okay, well, as you all know, there have been 13 slangs inside the camp and 10 disappearances that I'm 90% sure we can trunk up the slangs. They all center around Slither Ridge, more specifically around Sulphur Crater. I believe that this is where they're hiding, and this is where we're going to find them. Yeah, excuse me. You mean the missing people? Gage asked skeptically, not understanding any more than the rest of us. Yes, but also what's been disappearing. I believe that Sulphur Crater is a skinwalker nest, and I intend to collapse it. Herb's eyes got all big. Are you serious? Gage looked at the pair of them, clearly still lost. What? Skinwalkers, Gage. Try to keep up. Wade said. Okay, there hasn't been a confirmed sighting in 10 years, Herb said. Sure, we've had the odd disappearance, but no one has been mutilated like this since. At the Kreckner reunion of 2004, Wade interrupted. That was the last major activity from the crater, and I believe it lined up with what may count as the breeding cycle. Herb shuddered, clearly not enjoying the mental image of these things breeding. They likely enjoy the environment in the crater, and if we were fool enough to explore it. We'd find a nest down there with young ones. That's why they've been so aggressive lately. They have little ones to feed and to teach. I assume they are the ones killing at random. They're honing their skills for when they get larger and more formidable. We want to be done with them before that happens, so the five of us are heading there now to collapse the hole. He lifted a shotgun, a bag that rattled with ammo, and a radio he strapped to the cloth bag in turn. Everyone takes one of these, and one of these. Let's head out. We took ATVs to the site. It was still afternoon before we arrived. Slither Ridge was some of the toughest hiking the park had to offer. Sulphur Crater was near the center of the trail. It would be 2 hours of hiking. The trails were too treacherous to take the ATVs. The trailhead had a closed sign on it, but that didn't mean we were unlikely to meet people. Closed trail. It was more of a suggestion in a park this size. If anyone saw 5 rangers blundering around with shotguns and a flamethrower, even the most adventurous hiker might have some questions. And we didn't really want to answer questions today, so we set off down the trail at a quick and careful pace at our current rate. We would reach the crater by 3 and be back at the ATVs before dark. If we made it back, that was. As we bumped along, it was hard not to glance back at Herb with anxiety. Herb had an extra bag, a very important one. While the ammo bags flopped around against our backs, that one secret bag had been securely strapped to his side. Too much bumping could be very bad for whatever was inside that bag. If it went off early, it could spell Herb's death and our mission's failure. Herb was carrying about 10 points of dynamite in that bag, and he looked none too happy about it. He'd initially refused when Wade had handed the bag to him, but when Wade pointed out that he couldn't carry the flamethrower and the dynamite at the same time, Herb relented. They were the only 2 allowed to use either. He would do it because he understood its importance, but he didn't like it. None of us did. Now, the whole trail. I felt the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. It was as if something was watching us, maybe even several things. I wasn't the only one who tucked my gun into something of a ready position. Herb migrated to the center where we wouldn't accidentally hit him. The 5 of us stayed close as we waited for all hell to break loose. We'd seen the bodies of their victims, and none of us were in a big hurry to have that done to us. I wasn't certain, but I didn't feel like the shotguns were going to do much against skinwalkers if they came for us. We made it to the narrow trail before something tried to attack us. We were sliding along in a slow line, creeping along like ants, when something snarling came lunging from the trail ahead. In the daylight, it looked like a dog with extended limbs. It would have been funny if it didn't have a mouth full of snarling teeth and eyes full of crazy hate. It looked like a spider with too few legs. When I shot at it, it opened its mouth to let loose a weird, echoing howl. It fell sideways into the ravine. The rocks fell down behind it as it tumbled over the edge, and then another came crawling down the rock face. And this one, it was an enormous lizard, the green skin looking like rough armor. When Gage shot it, it fell into him and threatened to take him with it. Franks and I grabbed desperately for him. We were pulling him back from the edge. As the creature tried to avoid falling into the ravine, it gripped at Gage with its toes. They were lengthening as it tried to find purchase, but I slammed the butt of my gun against it before the 2 of us heaved it over. Gage was panicking, looking after it as though realizing that could have just as easily been him going over the edge, and we quickened our pace then. Whatever intelligence they had must have realized it was useless to ambush us on that narrow trail, and we weren't attacked again until we got to the hole. But we were on edge the whole trip. They hounded us. They stalked us from a distance. I had to steady my hands to stop the shotgun from shaking. I was no soldier. I'd never been to war, but I did feel a little safer with my shotgun in my hand. After a few years on the shotgun team in high school, I felt a little confident, at least, that I could hit my target every time. But when your target is not of this world, all that confidence kind of slips away. Well, we came to the Sulphur Crater just as the sun began to cast shadows over the trees. Wade took the lead. If one of us goes down, he begins. Make sure that dynamite gets into that hole. There should be enough there to collapse it. But who knows? Cover us, you 3. And remember, don't be afraid to shoot into us if it looks like we're going into the crater. Yeah, we'll already be dead at that point, Herb put in, seeming less than pleased. The sulfur crater had earned its name even from 10 feet away. I could smell it. It smelled like brimstone, like the gates of hell. They were incubating in that hole. I doubt they would have bothered with skins. I was curious to see what they really looked like, but not quite curious enough to go have a look. And besides, we had a job to do. We fanned out. We prepared to blast anything that got in range as Wade and Herb moved up to the edge. Herb took off the dynamite. He checked the bundles before selecting one. And just as he took out his lighter, the trees began to rustle and the skinwalkers began to come out. We thought the ones we saw on the cliffside were horrific, but these were truly monstrous. Human-animal hybrids messed up deer, cows, and walked on 2 feet and humans with too many limbs. They all came for us, as their skin wrinkled and twisted like wrapping paper. They were little more than costumes for these creatures. As our bullets shredded them, they revealed dark holes beneath, full of something worse. Jagged bones, piercing eyes, malformed teeth, oozing skin, pulsating organs. It was all beneath their forms. But the shells were not as useless as I'd feared, and most of them were pushed back a little. There were so many, though, and the guns only had 5 shots. Soon, we were pushing them as fast as we could work the slide. The constant blast made my gun warm to the touch. I looked over my shoulder to see Wade roasting a swarm of them as they came up from the pit. Herb was having trouble getting the fuse to light, and he finally just thrust the whole bag into the arms of a smoking skinwalker and he blasted him into the pit. There was a loud explosion a moment later, and as the rumbling reached a fever pitch, I turned to watch both of them fall into the pit. I was almost out of shells by this point. Gage was being savaged by one of the skinwalkers, and Frank was nowhere to be seen. I thought I heard a shotgun fire off in the woods about 20 feet away from us, but I didn't really have time to think about it. The hole was collapsing in on itself. The edges crumbled in to cover the opening. It seemed that it was either a run or die here. And I shoved the last 3 shells into my gun, and I took off. I kept running until I couldn't, and when my legs gave out underneath me, I fell down and panted on the side of the trail. I expected to die right there. I wondered if Wade and Herb had seen it coming when they'd fallen in. With any luck, they died with a fall. The thought of them trapped down there. With those things, it was enough to make my skin crawl off. Eventually, I got up, and I made my way back to the trail on unsteady feet. When the ATVs came into sight, I sighed with some relief, and I rode them home. And that was 5.5 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I gave my report at the station, and the higher-ups told me not to worry about it. They would do what they should have done at the start. They should have known this was too big for Ranger Wade and his circle to handle. They told me to take the week off, and when I returned, I was made a ranger and given a circle of junior rangers of my own. Train them up, keep them safe, and don't let anyone go near Slithering Ridge until further notice. Keep it and the people who use it safe. That's what I was told. And so I have. For the last 6 years, I have fought the few remaining skinwalkers who survived that day and the purge they came after, whatever they did. Sulfur Crater was little more than a bombed-out hill. The remains of my fellow rangers and the skinwalkers were nowhere to be found. Some still survive, however. I have trained my charges to fight them and protect the people of the Appalachian National Park. So if you come here, be very careful. And listen to the rangers. We know what's out there, and we're here to protect you. It all started with a couple of teenagers and a body. I've been a deputy sheriff in this small town for a long time. Usually it's peaceful, but one night something terrible happened and I owe someone my life. It was a slow Tuesday night. Time dragged on slowly as I sat in the patrol car. I was parked off to the side and in plain sight, about halfway along a straight stretch of dirt RD. This area was prone to reckless teenagers racing each other. Really wasn't much else for me to do, but to hope one of them would try just so that I would have something to do. 2 sets of headlights traveling side by side approached from the left around 10 p.m., and I flashed my lights as a warning. Immediately, the car swerved back into a single lane, and I chuckled at myself. As they crawled past at a dismal speed, One of the cars was pink, the other was yellow, and both had racing stripes along the hood. As they passed, they rolled down the windows to yell at me about how they were model citizens and wouldn't dream of racing down the road. Yeah, right, I thought sarcastically. I'd undoubtedly ruined their night, admittedly. It wasn't all that long ago that I myself was one to race my friends along this road. You can't beat the feeling of the cool night air in your hair, the deafening roar of the wind past your ears as you try to outrace the dust. But ever since I got promoted to deputy sheriff, I can't be setting a bad example like that. Law enforcement. It was never something I wanted to get into, but I grew up local. And there weren't a lot of other job opportunities in the area. So when the last guy retired, I applied for the position. Apparently, I was the only one. Now I'm the youngest in our small country office. I get stuck with all the jobs no one else wants to do, like night shift patrols. Still, it's a relatively peaceful, steady job, the station itself. It is located about an equal distance out from 3 even smaller nearby towns. These towns are tourist destinations along the way to the national park, which means when something goes wrong, we are their first call. Now, that's not to say that the calls we get are anything exciting. Most often it's to help some campers that miss check-in or day, hikers that sustain an injury on trail, and need an escort to get back to civilization. Stock standard stuff. However, my boss, Sheriff Johnson, did tell me about an interesting case a few years before I started working here. Allegedly, there's a group of campers that just disappeared. They set off into the wilderness on a Friday afternoon, only to have vanished completely come Monday morning. The camp was found in a restricted area. That area is off limits, only because it was close to bordering private property. The owners, the Hoffel family, were very particular about people crossing onto their land, but the campsite wasn't quite on their property, and nothing was out of place. There was no evidence of an animal attack or any foul play. The fire pit was cold, and all their belongings were left behind. Rescue workers and volunteers searched for 2 weeks. They didn't find anything, not even so much as a shoe print in the dirt. It was as if the campers simply evaporated into thin air. Do you think the hot springs had anything to do with it? I asked as Johnson explained the story. Yeah, don't talk about that family. It's not wise to mention their name. He responded tensely, ending the conversation. To be honest, I had known about the disappearances before the sheriff told me. It had made the local news at the time. It was rumored in town that the family had something to do with it. His reaction only made me more curious. The Hartfell family have lived in this area for generations. Their property is this huge expanse of land and largely just forest. None of them attend any of our local schools, and it is rare to see any member of the family in town. Honestly, I'm not even sure how they live. As far as I'm aware, no one has ever seen them as much as shopping for groceries. If it weren't for the fact that they are occasionally seen walking down the streets at night, one might assume that they don't exist at all. They've become something of a superstition in the area. Eyewitnesses say that they walk like they're drunk, shambling along together. Their children crawl on all fours, they say, and if you see them, you're supposed to pretend you didn't own their property. It's surrounded by a tall, well-maintained fence, plastered with keep out private property signs. If you're lucky and the weather permits, you might see a glimpse of their house between the trees surrounding it. Rumors say it's a massive 18th century mansion, but I've never seen it for myself. In fact, I'd only personally met one member of the Hodel family, Adarin Hodfell. Right when I was still new to the job, my partner David and I had been making our way between the towns. Nothing exciting, just routine patrol. But then we spotted a person up ahead. He seemed to appear on the road out of nowhere. He hesitated when he saw the patrol car, taking a step back to wait for us to pass before crossing. I can't say that he walked weirdly, as the rumor suggested. Instead, though, he stood straight up as a pole, and he looked very presentable. David stopped alongside him, and the man looked distinctly inconvenienced by our presence. Now, Adarin was tall and generally handsome. He had dark hair, amber eyes, and lightly tanned skin. He was about the same age as me, early 20s, and wearing a white business shirt. It was halfway unbuttoned, with neat pants that looked distinctly out of place. It was like he'd been changing clothes as he walked, and in his arms was a strange-looking coat that he kept a tight grip on. "You are one of the hot fellows, then," David commented. "Out on one of your spooky night walks." Personally, I never would have dared say that. "Yes, I'm Ed Aaron Hoffel," he responded politely, regardless. "Well, where you headed to, Ed Aaron Hoffel?" David kept going. "As you said, I'm just out for a walk," Ed Aaron replied. "Looks to me like you're loitering." "You wouldn't be loitering now, would you?" Ed Aaron didn't respond immediately to David's remark. Instead, he looked tense. His eyes flicked momentarily to the forest. It was only a brief glance, as if he was checking for witnesses, and then his attention refocused on us, and his eyes glinted in the darkness. It must have been a reflection from the car's lights, but it was enough to unsettle me. Oh, forgive me. I'm not loitering. I'm only walking to get some fresh air." He started calmly. "Good. You won't mind then if I check your ID." Adarin smiled sourly, and I noticed his teeth were sharper than expected. "Regrettably, I don't often carry my ID on me when going for a walk," he said. "That's so. We might have to take you in, then." "Mightn't we, Deputy Kading?" David dragged me into the conversation, and I looked at him with wide eyes. I was very anxious. I did not want this man in the back seat of the patrol car with us. "Yeah, aren't we supposed to call it in then?" I said nervously. David looked disappointed with my answer, while Adarin waited patiently for us to reach a decision. Eventually, David waved his hand dismissively. "Yeah, fine, too much work," he agreed. "But you better watch yourself, Hartfell. If you're still here when we get back, you're spending the night in the slammer." "Oh, of course. I'll do my best not to be here. Do drive safely now. I hear a deer come from nowhere around these bends. Wouldn't want you having an accident on these roads," the man replied. And get this, it wasn't 2 days later that David hit a deer. He was out of work for a week while he recovered in the hospital. And I try not to draw conclusions, but the coincidence still makes me shiver. The hot fowls, as far as records go, don't cause any trouble and have never had any run-ins with the law. But something about the idea of them, it sets my teeth on edge. My thoughts were interrupted as headlights approached at a high speed. I sighed to myself, it's probably the same cars from before, assuming I'd moved on. I flashed my lights again in warning. Now the cars didn't slow. I expected that they would fly past me at blinding speeds, so I reluctantly started my car. They were already doing well above the limit. I was going to have to really push it to catch up with them. That is, assuming they would even stop at all. Surprisingly, they came to a screeching halt beside my car. The 2 teenage boys driving the cars scrambled out from their expressions alone. I could tell they were terrified. Their eyes bulged out as they breathlessly glanced over their shoulders. "What the?" I started to get out as they reached me. "What are you?" "Someone needs help. There's someone screaming in the woods." The boys spoke over each other in their panic. Whoa, slow down. I can't understand you when you talk at once," I said as calmly as I could. "It's not every day something spooks teenage boys." "We heard screaming coming from the forest," the taller one said. "Screaming?" I asked. "Yeah, it sounded really bad, man. I think somebody's being murdered." The terrified honesty in his voice had convinced me he was telling the truth, and the hair on my arm stood on end. All right, calm down. It's okay. Maybe it's just a mountain lion. They sound crazy, I said, trying to put him at ease. No, I go hunting with my dad all the time. I know what they sound like, and this was definitely a woman screaming. "Please, you got to go help," the shorter boy exclaimed. I took a deep breath. "All right. Yeah, I'll go take a look." "How far is it?" I asked. It's all the way at the end of the road, by that creepy house on the hill. That's where we heard it." A chill ran down my spine, and I shivered. Of course, it was the Hartfell house. Right. All right, don't worry. I'll take a look, all right? "You two go home and stick to the speed limit," I told them firmly as I ushered them back to their cars. Now, truthfully, I didn't want to go investigate it all. I mean, I know it's my job, but the training program hasn't been great. Not much happens aside from the standard search and rescue or highway patrols. So anything past that or a lazy afternoon brawl at one of the two bars in town, it was not covered. It was lucky I could even remember the code to call it in. I arrived on scene within 10 minutes. My headlights shone slowly across the woods, reflecting back against pale trees and twiggy bushes. As I pulled up, I rolled down the driver's side window, and I listened. The forest was eerily still and quiet. Only the sound of loose gravel being crushed under truck tires broke the silence. Two abandoned cans of paint lay at the base of a large RD sign. Black streaks of burned rubber marked the gravel where the kids had taken off. Funny how they'd failed to mention they were tagging government property. At least it was easy to tell where they'd been as the fresh paint glistened. Some were off. The dark silhouette of the Hoffel house confirmed the location, and I hesitated. It wasn't all that late at night, but they had no lights on, and I couldn't imagine they were the kind of people to go to bed early, especially considering that a majority of the time they were only seen at night, shutting off the engine. I waited for any kind of noise. I listened intently for the screaming the boys had heard, but there was nothing. Instead, the silence was almost oppressive. It made the air thick, and I didn't want to get out of the car. Part of me wanted to call it a night and just head home, chalk it up to teenage imagination, and leave it at that. While another, less assured part reminds me that dead people don't scream if they'd hurt a woman, and if she was being hurt, it was possible that I was too late. With a deeply regretful breath in, I made the decision to get out of the car and investigate. Backup would be arriving soon anyway, and I told myself I'd just go a little ways into the forest, just far enough to look around. But not too far away, I couldn't see the red and blue lights of my patrol car. I cautiously scanned the area as I walked, shining the flashlight from one side to the other in a steady rhythm across the forest floor. "Hello, this is Deputy Kading from the Sheriff's Office. Anybody out here?" I called loudly, to receive no response. Seconds drew out into minutes. A breath of air rustled the undergrowth, making thin branches dance and dragging dry leaves across one another. It was the kind of breeze at the beginning of a storm that would pull the clouds across. It brought with it a bad feeling, instinct tells us. We should seek shelter and companionship under these conditions, and a sense of utter isolation hit me at once. I'd gone too far into the forest, and with mild panic, I realized I couldn't see my car anymore. Okay, crud, I muttered to myself. Now a search and rescue was going to be needed for me. I stumbled blindly through the forest for what seemed like hours. I pushed through the foliage like a clumsy bear. Branches grabbed at my clothes and hair. They cut my skin terribly as they snapped back into place. Overall comfort rating. It was like a 2 out of 10, and I would not recommend any such night adventures. So as I kept pushing through the woods, I stumbled over a fallen log, and I was sent tumbling down a small embankment. I landed hard on something soft at the bottom of the gorge, and I froze in place immediately. The soft thing I landed on was wet, slippery. In fact, I pushed away from it with reflex. For a moment, I thought I'd crushed a small animal or a large mushroom. However, directing the flashlight downward revealed the truth. I'd landed on a corpse. I recoiled from the freshly decaying body, and I tried to hold in my dinner. It was a woman. Her hair was tangled with blood, and her skin was very pale. The cause of death was impossible to determine. Blood soaked the leaves beneath her, and her face was unrecognizable. I'd never seen a dead body in person before, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't terrified. In those moments, I'm embarrassed to say that all rational thought left my body, and I couldn't remember any of the training on the ground beside the woman. It was a little white card propped neatly on the dirt, as if left there on purpose. I had no doubt what it was, for written on it in red ink were two simple words: "No trespassing." Of course, my first thought went to the Hoffels. Only the front portion of their property was fenced. The rest backed into the park with no clear boundary. Had they killed this woman for walking onto their land? Was I on their land? The soft sound of something dripping drew my attention to the large tree, just to the right of the body. A thick red liquid trickled down slowly, and as I followed it upward, my blood ran cold. Sitting high in the branches of the tree was what looked like an enormous bird. No, though not a bird. Looking at it, it was clearly not a bird. It appeared to be a man sitting perched with knees bent upward like a frog squatting. But it also wasn't human. He was holding onto the branch to steady himself, but his arms seemed far too long. He was shirtless, wearing only black pants and no shoes. Covering the upper half of his face was a broad bird skull, and beneath its eyes were a reflective yellow. His hair was dark, and his skin was slightly tanned. His feet seemed more like bird talons, and blood dripped slowly from his fingertips as he tilted his head to the side to watch me. Across his shoulders, he was wearing what I can only describe as a dried pelt of animal parts sewn together. It had bone barbs that hooked into his skin below the collarbones. More blood trickled from the wounds at each anchor point. The fur part around the base of his neck and throat, it almost seemed to bristle like it was alive. A large set of feathered wings hung folded back behind him. Knowing this was only a person gave me some level of confidence as I shakily raised the gun in warning. Okay, come down from there. You're under arrest for the murder of this woman." I felt stupid saying that. In response, he smiled slightly and made no move to do as instructed. "Don't cross the boundary, Deputy Kading." It startled me when he spoke, more so when he used my name, that I know this person. His voice was surprisingly soft, but the threat was unmistakable. "Pardon," I mumbled, completely taken aback. "If you take one more step, you will cross the boundary, and we will kill you as well." Gradually, I drew my eyes away from him to inspect the ground with suspicion. There wasn't any kind of marker indicating a boundary line, yet I still took an involuntary step back just in case. "Very good," he chuckled. His canine teeth were unnaturally pointed, and the wings on his back opened slightly, as if he were about to take flight. There was something familiar about him I just couldn't place, and as I tried to remember where I could possibly know this person from, a movement to the left caught my eye. A second person was crouched there among the brush. She was younger, perhaps only a teen. Her eyes glowed the same unnatural yellow from beneath the coyote skull she wore. Her clothes were very similar to the man's, only she didn't have wings as he did. Rather, a set of claws were worn over the top of her hands, and the bone hooked into her wrist. As I looked from him to her, I came to understand they were not the only ones. Further back, more pairs of eyes glinted at varying heights. What were these people? Was people even the right way to describe them? I understood then that I was definitely going to die. However, no sooner had the thought crossed my mind that a long scream came from deep within the forest. The sound was unnatural. It echoed through the night air and changed in pitch as it resonated. It melted from animalistic to unmistakably human as it drew out. It wasn't far away. All eyes turned toward the direction of the shriek in unison, waiting, it seemed, before a second group of creatures came into view. Now these creatures were similar to deer, only they stood on two legs and rotted flesh hung from their bones. Now I'm not a small man, but they towered over me. Their forelimbs were elongated, and their long claws raked the earth. The creature closest to me gave another inhuman shriek. The girl at the base of the tree immediately responded with one of her own. The cry that left her throat was horrific, a deafening screech that answered the challenge. It was in no way anything a human could do. I covered my ears instinctively. Hearing it made me want to vomit, and I stumbled around, disoriented. Blood rushed in my ears and adrenaline went through me. I tried to figure out what was happening. I was caught in some kind of territorial dispute among monsters, and I am sorry to say, training most definitely did not cover the situation in an instant. A sudden rush of motion erupted around me as creatures from both sides moved in to meet each other in combat. The sound was horrific. A cacophony of screams and shrieks filled the night air. They ranged in tone from human to unnatural as they collided. Flesh tore and bones broke as I did my best to just stay out of the way. Instinct took over then, and I tried to turn and run. I wanted to put as much distance between myself and these things as possible. Unfortunately, I was followed. The thing that pursued me clambered with alarming determination, and I scrambled to get away. It was one of the taller, deer-like creatures, and it screamed as it gave chase. The noises sounded human. It alternated between sobs of agony and blood-chilling screams, as if echoing the voices of its victims. If that was somehow intended to lure me back to it, it was not working. Now the creature was faster than I was, and in moments it was on me. So in a last-ditch effort, I fired my gun, aiming it for its chest. The bullets hit, but the effort was wasted, and I knew I was going to die. That much was certain. However, just as it was about to attack, a mass of dark feathers from the sky stood between it and me. Massive wings beat furiously, and low growls intermingled with vicious snarls. I recognized it as the man from the tree. He landed directly on top of the other creature, knocking it to the ground and tearing pieces from it. The deer thing fought back just as violently. It ripped one of the wings from the man's back. Fresh blood splattered the surrounding vegetation, but he didn't even look like he cared. Now, I probably should have used that time to run. Instead, I stood frozen in place, just watching him fight. The damaged wing landed close to me. It was gigantic. The feathers were incredibly long. Fluid leaked from the broken hollow of the bone, and I noticed with surprise that the entire thing was sewn. It was held together with leather and twine to bind the feathers. But it had moved so naturally earlier, I thought now. I'm not one to believe in witchcraft, but there was simply no other explanation. Gradually, the forest quieted as the fighting stopped, and directly in front of me, the winged man had won. I knew it because he slammed the deer creature's skull into the ground, and it broke apart. Red liquid dripped from his hands, and he was covered in grime. The skull mask over his face was cracked, and he took it off slowly to cast it aside with a snort of disgust. Useless, he muttered, and he turned back to me. I recognized him immediately. Adarin Hauntful. His unnatural yellow eyes came to rest on me. I couldn't read his face. As the rest of the family emerged through the woods to stand beside him. "Did you get 'em all?" He asked casually. He wasn't speaking to me, but he didn't break eye contact. "Yes," the coyote girl answered with a satisfied smile. "Good. But what will you do about that?" she asked. Looking in my direction, Adarin paused for a moment, considering. He moved closer. I took a step back and fell backward, and the man crouched beside me, grabbing my face. His skin was warm, and his claws broke the surface of my skin just slightly. Blood swelled where his claws dug into my face. As he examined me, he was uninjured, a Duran announced. So the coyote girl huffed, and he did as he was told. He did not cross the border. What's your point?" she demanded. "The rest of you may go home." "I'll return shortly," he answered. She hesitated, clearly not happy with his response. However, she didn't argue, and the hot fells melted back into the forest. Their eyes glinted as they disappeared one by one. Adarin waited, allowing his family to leave before returning his attention to me. "Would you like to live?" he asked, catching me by surprise. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to answer. "Do I get a choice?" I replied. "Well, that depends on you." "On me?" "Yes. I'm going to ask you some questions, and if you answer them correctly, you may go. If not, you'll become a permanent part of this forest. Do you understand?" I nodded. "Good. Now, what did you see here tonight?" Adarin began, and I panicked, thinking. "Nothing. I didn't see anything." "Good. Now, what is my name?" "Adarin Haunt," I started, but corrected myself quickly as he tensed. "I don't know." He smiled, bemused. "Good choice. Now what will you say when you get back to the station and to the sheriff?" My heart pounded. I understood by now that the wrong answer would get me killed. "I'll say it was a prank. Some kids were messing around in the forest. The call was for nothing." "How smarter than you look," he said, standing and offering me a hand. "Can you stand?" I didn't know if I was supposed to accept his help or not, but I did, and he hauled me off the ground effortlessly. "Walk that way for 30 minutes, and you'll find a road." He pointed to the right of me, and I followed the direction with my eyes. "Why?" I mumbled. "Why? What?" He returned. "Well, why help me help you?" He chuckled. "I'm not helping you. This isn't for nothing. You owe me a debt, and I intend to collect soon. Don't disappoint me now. You won't like the consequences if you do." I shuddered. I made a deal with a devil, and I hadn't even known it. As he moved to go, he tilted my chin up briefly, like an adult giving a pep talk to a child. "Now don't look so worried. I'm sure you won't be a waste, okay? We'll be watching, though, so be careful," Adrian assured me with an unsettling smile. And then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness, just as his family had. I didn't notice him collecting his broken wing, but he was gone too, and I made the long walk back to my car in shell-shocked silence. Now, true to my word, I called in a non-event issue of teens tagging signs and departed early. Almost no time had passed, and I couldn't rationalize anything that happened. More than that, I live in a constant dread, waiting for the day Adarino fell, asks for whatever favor I now owe him. I saw the job listing 2 weeks ago. Wanted night guard at West Market in New Hope, Pennsylvania, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift, $21 an hour. And the whole thing struck me as odd right off the bat. What kind of grocery store needs a security guard when it's closed? Was Prime really that bad? But I needed money badly. So 2 days later, after a phone interview with a man named Clive, I showed up for the first shift. As soon as I pulled up, I understood why they needed a night guard. The grocery store sat at the edge of a rundown strip mall. Large signs reading space for rent hung in the store windows. But judging by the dusty glass and flickering lamps, no one had taken them up on the offer in years. I parked near the front door, and as I approached the building, I saw a woman hurrying away from the store. "You must be Aaron," she said breathlessly. "The night guard." Yeah, that's me," I answered. "Okay, well, Clive left you some instructions. I put them on the conveyor belt at Register 1. She gave me a polite nod and then stepped around me, heading for the only other car in the parking lot. "Okay, thanks," I said. "Be friendly," my new inner voice said. "She's your new coworker." I turn around. "Hey, what's your name?" But she was already diving into the car. The door slammed, the car reeled out of the parking lot space, and then she was gone. So I turned back towards the store. The parking lot was completely empty now, and the nearest street light was flickering erratically. A cold wind swept in, whipping a crumpled paper bag across the parking lot. "Well, here goes nothing," I muttered to myself. I stepped up to the store. The glass doors squeaked as they opened for me, and I stepped inside. Now, despite its outward appearance, the store was actually pretty nice inside. Bright fluorescent lights shone from overhead, jazzy music played from hidden speakers. I headed over to Register 1, where a folded piece of paper was waiting for me. I flipped it open, and I began to read. "Dear Aaron," the note said, "welcome to the West family. We sincerely hope you enjoy your first shift. To help you, we've compiled a list of rules that should make your shift as easy as our fresh-baked apple pie. Rule number 1. As night guard, you are expected to patrol the store every half hour. To make sure nothing is amiss, you may spend the rest of your time in the break room at the back of the store, checking the security camera feeds. Rule 2. Do not go down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. Rule number 3. If you hear a knocking sound coming from the freezers in the frozen food aisle, ignore it. Number 4. If you see a shopping cart that hasn't been put away, please return it to the cart station at the front of the store immediately. Number 5. Don't be alarmed if you find a pool of blood in the meat aisle. Sometimes our meat packages leak. Simply head to the storage closet, get the mop and bucket, and clean it up. However, don't step in the puddle or touch the blood in any way. Number 6. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room and stay there until she leaves. Do not call the police or report a break-in. Do not make eye contact with her. Number 7. The music we play throughout the store is a pre-recorded disc of instrumental jazz. If the music ever stops, immediately go to the break room and stay there until it resumes. Number 8. Do not, under any circumstances, end your shift early. Thank you so much. And again, I hope you enjoy your shift. Signed, Clive. I stared at the rules, rereading them slowly. There was a weird woman in the store. Avoid aisle 7. I had never been given instructions like this in my life. Even when I worked as a bouncer at a nightclub in the bad part of town, maybe it was a test. They wanted to see how well I could follow instructions, no matter how absurd they were. I looked up at the security camera staring down at me from the corner. Okay, challenge accepted. I glanced at my phone. Now 12:06 a.m. Might as well get my first patrol out of the way before getting settled in. It was odd walking through the store when it was so empty and quiet. All the bread and muffins had been stored away somewhere. White plastic film had been pulled down over the vegetable display to keep the cold in. When I got to the end, I made a right into the meat section. Sheets of plastic had been pulled over the meat coolers too. I saw flashes of red through the gaps of massive ribeye and sirloin steaks, and other big slabs of meat with a bone still intact. Well, I wasn't a vegetarian. I never really liked the sight of raw meat. I turned instead to the aisles. Aisle 3. Pasta and sauces, all lined up on the shelves, glinting in the fluorescent light. Aisle 4, cookies and snacks. Aisle 5, aisle 6. And then I remembered. Yeah, alright, I wasn't supposed to look at aisle 7. I forced myself to look down at the floor. Yeah, it was stupid, but they told me not to look. On the off chance they were going to check the CCTV footage later to grade my performance. I had to follow every rule. I continued farther into the store. A few minutes later, I found the break room, a nondescript brown door with a little square window cut into it. I took note of its location for later. As soon as I was done with this patrol, I was going to break out my laptop and finish watching Friday the 13th Part 4. I continued on until I was at the west end of the store, the frozen section. I turned down the aisle, heading back towards the front, and that's when I saw it. A shopping cart parked askew in the middle of the aisle. I huffed. Of all the rules, this was the one that annoyed me the most. I was hired to be a security guard, not a cleanup crew. Wasn't it other employees' jobs to put all the carts away at closing time? Sighing, I began pushing it towards the front of the store. The wheels rolled slowly across the tile floor. The jazz music played softly in the background. I turned the corner and I walked past the cash registers heading towards the front door, and that's when I heard it. A soft sound, barely audible over the music. I stopped moving and I tried to listen. Several seconds of silence went by, and then I heard it again. It sounded like someone crying, and the hairs on my neck stood on end. There's no one here. The door has been locked this whole time. Unless a customer accidentally stayed past closing time. Maybe that employee, the woman I'd run into in the parking lot, didn't notice them, and she locked up before they could get out. Who's there? I called, breaking into a run. Where are you? They didn't reply, though. They just kept sobbing. I continued in the direction of the sound, calling out to them and saying everything's going to be okay. But then I stopped dead. The sound. It was coming from aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. The rules had been very clear about that. I stopped just short of the aisle next to an end-cap display of mayonnaise, and I carefully positioned myself so I was hidden. All right, I'm going to help you, I called out. Can you tell me what happened? And they finally spoke, but they didn't answer my question. Help me, the voice cried. Please. I wanted to step into the aisle now. My foot was halfway off the floor, ready to run in and get them, but something stopped me. A gut instinct, a little alarm bell going off in my head. Because out of all the aisles, what were the chances this person would be in aisle 7? And besides, they were safe. They were in an empty store with me. It's not like they were in a dark alleyway in the middle of the night. Why don't you come out of that aisle? I called. Then I'll be able to help you, please, the voice replied. Help me? All right. This is stupid, I thought. Clearly some person got stuck in here after closing time and they're scared. Just go into the aisle and help them get home. But there was this other part of my brain, this instinctual lizard brain part, and it was screaming at me not to move a muscle. Do you need me to call someone? I tried. Your parents, the police, help me, the voice pleaded again. They helped me. It sounded very similar every time they said it, an emphasis on the word me. It almost sounded like a recording or some AI-generated thing looping over and over. It didn't sound natural. All right, come out of the aisle," I said. "Come out and I'll help you." The sobs got louder, faster, and hysterical. "Help me," the voice pleaded again in a desperate tone that made my stomach twist. I stood there, pressed against the mayonnaise display. Listening to them sob was difficult, even if it did sound slightly unnatural. I could call the police, I thought. They know what to do. Except I'd left my cell phone with my backpack at cash register 1, and getting it would mean crossing aisle 7. The rules didn't say anything about walking past aisle 7, though. They just said I shouldn't go down it or look at it, and I couldn't just stand here and do nothing. What if it really was someone who needed help? A child, maybe, who'd sprained their ankle and couldn't get up. "All right, don't worry, okay? I'm going to get my phone and I'm going to call the police." I called out, and then I took a deep breath and I stepped across the threshold of aisle 7 towards register 1. And as soon as I took a step, the crying stopped just like that. Violent sobbing. And then in an instant, nothing like a switch had flipped. And then the footsteps started. Loud, slapping footsteps of someone running down the aisle. They sounded way too heavy to be a child, and they were coming straight at me. My heart dropped. It's a trap, and they're coming for me, and I'm probably going to die here. But as soon as I made it across the aisle, the footsteps stopped. All I heard were the soft jazz tunes playing through the speakers overhead. I ran as fast as I could. I ran to the break room, completely forgetting about the cart I was supposed to return. The break room was small and cramped. The little square window and the door had been blocked out with construction paper from the inside. The only source of light came from the computer screen on the desk, displaying the security camera feeds. I scrolled through the feeds and I quickly noticed that none of them offered coverage of aisle 7. It seemed like the cameras were intentionally placed to avoid that aisle. After searching the grainy black and white video for anything out of place, I leaned back in the chair and I closed my eyes. When I finally opened them again, it was almost 12:30. Time for my next patrol. I didn't want to go. I felt safe here, locked up in this little room, but I also knew I wouldn't be safe if I didn't listen to the rules. I shuddered, imagining what would have happened to me if I'd gone down aisle 7. I pulled myself out of my seat and I headed for the door. And the store was totally silent. No hysterical sobbing or pounding footsteps. And I started my patrol near the back, walking up aisle 17. Cans of food glinted on the shelves as I passed. But when I glanced at them, I didn't see any labels I recognized. No chef ravioli or giant green men, just generically labeled cans of meat stew, in fact. All the aisle had was meat stew, the same cans over and over and over again. I reached the end and I turned right towards the front of the store, and that's when I realized that I had already broken one of the rules, the cart. I had returned it, and it wasn't where I'd left it, instead of haphazardly parked near aisle 7. It now sat next to one of the cash registers, like some ghost man was checking out his groceries. I paused for a second, hands hovering above the handle, and then I grabbed it and headed towards the door. Outside, the parking lot was pitch black, not a single ST lamp. The shopping carts are only a few feet from the door, I told myself. Just go out and back in. It'll take like 2 seconds. I did it as quickly as possible. I ran into the darkness, slammed the shopping cart into the row. I hurried back inside and then I shut the doors and I clicked the lock. Okay, that wasn't that bad, I said to myself, letting out a sigh of relief for a second. I reveled in the peace of the store, the silence, the safety of being locked inside with no one else but me. But then I stopped. The silence. Wait, the jazz music wasn't playing. How long had it been off? I'd been so preoccupied with returning the cart. I wasn't even paying attention. I broke into a sprint towards the back of the store, cookies and snacks flashing by me, and then I swerved right and I sprinted into the break room. I pulled out the list of rules and I read them over again. Do not, under any circumstances, end your shift early. Why do you write that? Was it just because he didn't want anyone flaking out on him? Or if I left early, would something horrible happen to me? Because I really, really wanted to leave. I opened my backpack, pulled out the soda I'd brought, and I popped it open. I took a sip, scrolling through the security feed, and thought for 5 more hours. The next 4 patrols went fairly well. The rules didn't say how long they had to be, so every 30 minutes I sprinted around the store as fast as I could. The whole thing only took about a minute, and then for the other 29, I locked myself in the break room. On the second patrol, I heard knocking as I ran down the freezer aisle. It started as light tapping across the glass, and then it grew into loud thumps, like someone was slamming their palms against the glass doors. As per the rules, I ignored it. I just kept running until I made it to the break room. On the last patrol, the music had cut out again, so I quickly detoured and I got to the break room as quickly as I could. The silence ringing in my ears. And now, here I was in the break room with 3 hours left. I stare at my phone's clock, ticking slowly towards 3 a.m. I stood up, shaking out my nervous energy, preparing for my next sprint. I'd actually been a runner back in high school, but in the past 10 years, I'd gone way out of shape. The last patrol had left me panting and out of breath, my legs aching. It was time. My hand closed around the doorknob. I paused. Okay, 3:21. Go. I wrenched the door open, and I shot out into the store. But I didn't get very far because there was an enormous pool of blood on the floor. I froze. It was like all the air was sucked out of my lungs. I stared at the blood shining under the fluorescent lights. The rules said to clean it up, I thought, but that would take at least 10 minutes. It wasn't safe out here. I swallowed, then I hurried to the supply closet, got a mop and bucket, and I started cleaning as fast as I could. The job was very messy. I slid the mop through the blood, and then I dumped it into the bucket, then rinsed and repeated. The soapy water turned red. A few times it almost splashed up and landed on me. But I did it. I cleaned it all up without touching a drop. Unfortunately, by the time I was finished, it was 3:27. Time for my next patrol. I was too tired to run, so I settled for a brisk walk around the store. I headed up through the frozen food, and now I could see the handprints on the glass doors. Handprints of all sizes, tilted and smudged. Except the proportions looked all wrong, with fingers that were far too long and too thin. I averted my eyes and I kept going. 2.5 more hours. My footsteps clicked against the tile floor. The jazz was starting to grate on my nerves. I must have heard the same looping saxophone melody like 20 times now. It made me want to punch something. Sighing, I continued towards the produce section, quickly walking past the aisles, and then I stopped. Something caught my eye in one of the aisles. I backed up and took a better look. There was someone standing in aisle 9. A woman. She wore this blue linen dress and black high heels. Long black hair cascaded down her back, almost to her waist. She faced away from me, standing totally still. Her thin white arms hung limply at her sides. In her hand, there was a basket filled with cuts of raw meat. The rule echoed in my head. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room. Do not make eye contact. So I slowly backed up as quietly as I possibly could, and then I started down the next aisle towards the break room. I heard her footsteps echo against the tile, and I hurried towards the break room, but then I stopped. Her footsteps weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from in front of me. I averted my eyes to the floor, and just then I saw 2 black high-heeled shoes step into the aisle. I stared at the floor. Do not make eye contact. The words repeated over and over in my head, but I had to get to the break room, and she was standing in my way. All I could see were her shiny high-heeled shoes and the little drops of blood that leaked out of the meat packages in her basket dropping on the floor. I backed up. That was the only way I could go. I kept my eyes on the floor, careful not to look up, but she was following me. For every step I took, I saw a shiny black heel come into view, attached to a thin, white, elongated leg. She was keeping time with me. I walked faster. So did she. I wheeled around and I broke into a sprint. I ran down a random aisle and I sprinted towards the break room. But halfway down the aisle, I was forced to stop. A shopping cart was parked across the middle, blocking my way. And not just one cart. Several of them stacked up in a teetering tower that was nearly 10 feet high. I was trapped. I backed away, my heart pounding. I could hear slow, methodical footsteps coming towards me like a cat stalking its prey. I took my chances. I turned around, sprinted back out into the open, and I stepped into the next aisle. And no, I knew it instantly. A tattered lump of gray clothing and sickly pale blue skin sat on the floor. The person, the creature, the thing folded in on itself in a pose like a crying child. But it wasn't anything even resembling a human. It had several strange lumps and appendages, and worst of all, it didn't have a head. I knew then I had stepped into aisle 7, and I immediately reversed direction, but not before the thing unfolded itself and began to move toward me. I whipped around and I started screaming, sprinting down the next aisle, and miraculously, I made it to the end in one piece. I veered sharply left towards the break room. Almost there. Almost there. My hand hit the doorknob. I wrenched it open and I dove inside. And then I collapsed in the chair, panting. I sucked in a breath, staring at the locked door. Am I really safe here? Technically, the rules never said it would be safe. Maybe staying in here only decreased my chance of death. I turned my attention to the security camera feed on the monitor. It showed the middle of the store, and from what I could see, the aisles were empty. No trace of the woman. I switched to the next feed, the produce section empty. I switched to the next one, and I jumped. She was standing right there. She was right in front of the break room door. She stood so still. The image could have been a photograph, except for the blood slowly dripping from the meat in her basket. I swallowed again and glanced away from the monitor at the door. My heart slammed into my ribs when I saw her shadow under the door. Go away, I thought. Just go away, I pleaded. The shadow of her head in the window tilted, as if contemplating her next move. And now I knew why the window had been covered. I forced my eyes away, and I looked back at the screen. She was still standing there, except there was something different about the way she was standing. I squinted at the grainy black and white image, trying to figure out what was going on. When my eyes finally fell on her heels, I realized her feet were facing forward, but I was still looking at the back of her head, at the long black hair going down to her waist. Okay, either her hair was hanging over her face, or she turned her head all the way around. It must have been 20 minutes before she began to walk away from that door, and I couldn't tell if it was just the low frame rate of these crummy cameras. But her movements looked jerky, her body lurching with every step. It made me sick to watch, and when she disappeared from the screen, I let out a sigh of relief. My hands and legs were shaking. I felt weak. Okay, think. The rules said to wait until she left. All I had to do was watch the feed by the front door. As soon as I see her leave the store, I'd be safe. After a few minutes of sitting there waiting for my heart rate to return to normal, I forced my fingers back to the keyboard. I pressed the arrow key to move to the next feed, and then the next and the next, looking for the camera at the front of the store, and oh my God, her face filled the entire screen. Her eyes were terrifying. They were pure white. No pupils, no irises. Just pure white eyes threaded with spidery veins. I screamed and jumped back, and then I shut my eyes. The rule said I couldn't make eye contact, right? Did this count? Through the screen. I shuddered and I covered my face with my hands. My entire body was shaking, and when I finally took a peek through my fingers, I saw her rapidly crawling away down the wall like some kind of spider. And then she pushed through the glass doors and disappeared into the night. She was gone. I was safe, or safer at least, in this cursed grocery store. I glanced at the clock. 3:58 a.m. Time to patrol, but I really didn't want to. But I forced myself to swing the door open, and I ran as fast as I could through the store. I saw shopping carts stacked in teetering towers, heard hands pounding against the freezer doors, saw little spots of blood in the shiny tile from the meat in the woman's basket. And then a minute later, I was done. I locked myself in the break room, and for the first time in years, I just cried. The remaining patrols went by without incident, and though I did hear more sobbing from aisle 7 and more banging from freezers. And then the hour had come, 6 a.m. My heart soared at the sight of the pink dawn sky through the glass doors. I was safe. I was free. When I glanced out into the parking lot, I saw a few cars pulling in, disgruntled, groggy employees clutching coffees heading towards me. And as soon as the first one came in, I flew out of the store, ran to my car, and I got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I've never felt such relief, such happiness. I felt like a new man. All my problems, even my financial ones, seemed small compared to what I'd just been through. When I pulled onto the main road, I rolled down my windows and I flicked on a radio. But it wasn't my usual classic rock station that blared through the speakers. Instead, I heard the upbeat tune of a saxophone. And as I listened to that horrible looping melody, I realized that my days as a night guard for Westmarket may not be over yet. There's something on the moon. It doesn't want to be found. We never should have gone to space. Not after what I've seen at NASA. Yeah, that NASA. I used to work there during the height of the space race, but I'm retired now. My bones are hurting, and always more than I'd breathe. But before I punch my ticket out of here, I've got a story to tell. One that's been eating at me for decades. You see, we never really landed on the moon. We've always meant to, though. It was the summer of '69, and we were getting ready for the launch. The whole world was buzzing about Apollo 11. So that whole part's real. We had the rockets, the astronauts, and the math all worked out. Me? I was just a young buck back then. I was fresh out of college with a shiny new degree in engineering, and somehow I landed a gig as a junior engineer at NASA. And damn, I was living the dream. I was part of the team working on the communication systems. We had to make sure Armstrong and Aldrin could talk to us from all the way up on the moon's surface. Life at NASA was kind of like being in college again, actually. But this time we had something bigger to worry about than a midterm test. A regular day started with grabbing a cup of coffee that tasted like battery acid. Then it was straight to checking last night's data, just to make sure nothing blew up or decided to stop working. My desk was always a mess. I had papers everywhere, full of scribbles I made at 2 a.m. that I hoped would make sense in the morning. The place was always humming. Folks would be in and out of the offices, walking fast, talking faster, and we'd have these meetings that could go on for days. It felt like planning a really complicated road trip, except the destination was the moon, and you couldn't just turn around if you forgot something. Lunch was at our desks, usually a sandwich in one hand and a pen in the other. Sometimes we get so caught up in work we forget to eat until someone looked up and saw it was dark outside. But man, you know the thrill of it. You'd be sitting there, tired as hell, and suddenly something clicks and you're one step closer to getting a man on the moon. With all the tech nowadays, that may not sound too impressive to you kids, but back then it was as close to magic as you could get. That's what kept us going, even when the coffee ran out. But one night, a few weeks before the scheduled launch, we picked up something strange. I was testing the transponder we were supposed to use to talk to the guys up in space. My eyes were glued to my notes, but my head was dreaming about a cold beer. And that's when the signal came through. It wasn't like anything we'd ever heard before. It wasn't static, and it was too structured to be a glitch. It was a series of beeps and rings, like Morse code. And then we realized the signal was on a loop. That's not something you find in nature. We all huddled around, listening to this signal. The techs scrambled to find the source. Maybe some wires got crossed, or, transmissions got mixed up. We looked all over to make sure it wasn't some sort of interference. Hell, maybe it was the Russians messing with us. Well, we did eventually find out the source, and the signal was coming from outer space. We don't know how, but the data was right there before our eyes. It felt like the air dropped a few degrees when we found out. The room was silent, except for that beeping playing through the speakers. I remember looking over my boss, a guy named Carl. He was a man who'd seen it all. He was there right when the space race was just kicking off. He went white as a sheet. He stared at the speakers as if he'd just seen a ghost. Shut it off, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, rumors, and more coffee. The excitement had turned into a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. We were no longer talking about trajectories and fuel calculations. No, all we talked about now was that signal. When we first caught that signal, it was like nothing we'd heard before. It wasn't just beeps and rings. It was a complex, tangled mess of sounds that got under your skin. The sounds overlapped one another. There were layers to it, almost like a song. We thought it was a message, maybe even a warning. We just couldn't figure it out. But we couldn't do the launch until we did that. So that meant staying up all night with the team. Nights turned into a blur. Most of us camped out in the offices, hunched over the equipment, just endlessly replaying the signal to try and crack it. Our eyes were glued to printouts, ears filled with that eerie sound. Despite everything, we were excited at the actual thought of communicating with something out there, and that was part of the thrill. But the excitement turned to frustration real quick. We tried everything, running the signal through every piece of analysis software we had, breaking it down, looking for patterns or repeats, anything that might give us a clue. But it was like trying to read a book with pages missing. So we called them the big guns, some code breakers from the NSA. These folks, they were the best of the best. They were used to dealing with the kind of secrets that could start or stop wars. If anyone could crack it, it was them. Or so we thought. They came in with their briefcases and serious faces. They set themselves up in an unused lab, and they got to work. Days passed, then weeks. We watched them, waiting for any progress, but it never came. The looks on their faces went from determined to puzzled to downright pissed. The long nights eventually took their toll, tempers frayed, and those frantic meetings turned into shouting matches. What does it mean, and why can't we figure it out? And nobody had the answers with each failed attempt. The pressure increased. We were supposed to be launching a mission to the moon, but instead we were just stuck. With an operation like this, there's no room for unknowns. We can't risk not knowing what this signal meant. With each passing day, the launch date loomed closer. I was practically living at the employee lounge now, eventually. That signal started messing with us in ways we didn't expect. At first, it was just headaches, the kind that feel like a band tightening around your skull. We could easily say that it was from the late nights. But then things got weirder. People started reporting nightmares, the kind that made someone wake up screaming in the night again. The medics could say it was from stress, but these nightmares, they were the same for everyone. Those who had them reported seeing strange, towering structures on the moon, twisty, pointy spires that were so tall they almost blocked out the stars, and there were things moving around between the towers. Huge, lumbering shadows that rocked the ground with every step, and underneath it was a humming sound. It blended with a beeping signal to form a song that made you sick. Then the paranoia came. You catch someone staring at the signal playback, their eyes glazed over, muttering to themselves. Simple conversations turn into arguments. People report hearing the signal even when they've gone home, so no one really questioned it. When people started bringing sleeping bags to work, hallucinations were the last straw. An engineer came running into the canteen one afternoon. White as a sheet, he kept yelling about seeing those towers from his dreams. He'd see them in the distance when he looked out of a window, and he'd feel the ground shake as those giant moon creatures moved closer and closer. The engineer had to be sedated after that. We tried to keep it all under wraps to maintain a semblance of professionalism, but the effects of that signal just kept getting worse. We tried to focus on other work, but the beeping had dug into our brains. It spread among the departments. It was affecting people who weren't even involved in decoding it. One of the junior techs started talking about hearing a whispering sound. It came from the moon itself, he said. It was nonsense, of course, but when you looked into his eyes, you could see he believed every word of it. The whispers told him about secrets buried deep under the moon's surface. Secrets meant for him to find. Then there was the astrophysicist who'd been with the project from the start. She claimed she could see the structures from her dreams on the images we have of the moon. She'd get people to look at her telescope and her printouts, insisting on it. We saw nothing, of course, but she was convinced. And then one of the math guys started freaking out. He went around saying he was turning into moon dust. He was staring at his hands one day, and he started screaming. He said his skin was cracking open. Little bits of him were turning to dust every time he moved. He was crumbling apart, he said. He could feel himself blowing away. It didn't make sense to us, but the fear in his eyes was clear. He flinched if he even tried to touch him. Watching him, you could almost believe what he was saying was true. But it was the incident with Carl that made us all stop and realize just how bad things had gotten. Carl was a practical guy who never bought into any of the moon madness until one day he started screaming, and pointing to an empty corner. He was saying he could see one of those moon entities right there, and it was reaching out for him in his panic. Carl backed away so fast he tripped over a cable. He went crashing into a bank of equipment, and he hit his head on a desk. He had to get stitches, and that was the wake-up call we all needed. This wasn't just stress or exhaustion. The signal was doing something to us, something real rather than physical. So NASA went into full damage control mode. They started rounding up anyone who was talking too much about the signal or acting weird. They were to be given special attention in a quarantine zone. They sectioned off an unused wing on the campus to house them. It wasn't long, though, before more people claimed they were turning into moon dust. The quarantine zone filled up quickly to keep the lid on all this. Federal agents showed up. You could spot them a mile away with their stiff suits and stiffer faces. They walked around like they owned the place. They were there to make sure no one outside these walls got wind of what was happening. And suddenly we had actors smiling at cameras for press conferences, pretending to be NASA scientists, talking about how great the mission prep was going and me. They slapped more work on the desk and they told me not to leave. But then I started seeing it. Moon dust. Or at least my brain told me it was moon dust. I had no way to actually check, but I saw fine chalky sand collecting in the corners of my office. On my papers, even on my keyboard, every speck of it glimmered like it held a diamond. But I clamped down every instinct to tell someone about it. The last thing I wanted was to end up quarantined or worse, so I kept quiet. I pretended I didn't see the dust and that I wasn't seeing them form into those towers from my dreams. I had to keep working. I had to crack that signal. It was the only thing left that made any sense. With everything going sideways, NASA was still hell-bent on keeping the show on the road. The circle of us still poking at that signal had shrunk down to just a handful. The rest of the crew was all hands on deck for the launch, the astronauts. Well, they were kept in the dark about the whole thing. They weren't allowed to really talk to any of us. The higher-ups were worried they could get infected by this moon madness. But as the launch date drew closer, things got even weirder. We were gearing up for what should have been a routine systems check. It's something we'd done 100 times before, only this time. Nothing went right. It started small machines freezing, readings not making sense. We rebooted, double-checked the codes, and ran diagnostics. The usual drill. But then the main control machines just lost their mind. Instead of the standard readouts, we got strange symbols no one recognized. We tried to bypass the affected systems, but it was like the signal, or whatever the hell it was, had jumped from our heads into the machines. Commands were ignored or worse, turned into gibberish. And then the telemetry data from the test module. It went haywire 1 second. It showed the module on the launch pad stable as you please. The next, it was registering it as if it was already in lunar orbit. Impossible readings. The final straw came when the launch sequence initiated all on its own. Alarms blared, lights flashed. We scrambled, hammering at the keyboards and yanking cords. The sequence was stopped. Thank the stars, but the damage was done, and there was no way to explain this. No amount of rebooting and recalibrating could scrub away the fact that our systems were compromised. We had to delay the launch officially. We blamed it on a technical glitch, but between us we knew the truth, that signal. It wasn't just a sound in our ears or in our dreams anymore. It was here, actively messing with the launch. And those symbols, they weren't just random. They were trying to tell us something. The failure wasn't just a setback, it was a warning. And deep down, I think we all knew that. But admitting that, it meant facing the reality of what we were dealing with. And that was a step nobody at NASA was ready to take. Uncle Sam poured way too much money into this to just back out now. But despite the whole mess with a failed systems check, I felt like I hit the jackpot. Those symbols that popped up on the screens, I figured they might just be the key to cracking this thing. I grabbed the printouts and I put them all over my office. Most nights I went over and over those symbols. I tried to match them with anything. Ancient languages, astronomical charts, you name it. But as the nights dragged on, my grip on what was real and what wasn't, it started to slip more than once. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see my office coated in moon dust. It was. It was getting to me, making me question what would crack first, the code or my sanity. And then one night I had the dream, calling it vivid. It doesn't do it justice. It was more real than anything I'd ever experienced. I was standing on the dark side of the moon, but this wasn't the moon like any photo or textbook I'd ever seen. The ground shimmered with a dull glow that cast eerie shadows all around me. The sky was filled with stars so dense and bright, it felt like I could reach out and touch them with my hand. But it wasn't peaceful or awe-inspiring. It was suffocating. There was a silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. My head started to ache the more I tried to listen for something, anything. It was quiet, so complete I wanted to scream. And those structures, my God, they towered over everything. They were made of materials that looked like a mix between metal and sand. The surfaces were so dark that it seemed to absorb the light. Their shapes were all wrong. The angles made my head hurt if I looked too long. It was as if they were designed to only be seen from the corner of your eye, not stared at directly. And the most unsettling part, the moon dust. It wasn't just on the ground. It swirled around these structures, sticking to my hands and my face. I tried to wipe it away, but it clung to me, trying to make me par the moon. In my dream, I kept walking. Each step kicked up clouds of that strange, glittery dust. I walked until I came across a canyon, but this wasn't any ordinary canyon. It stretched far and wide, deeper than anything I'd ever seen. Its edges shimmered under the starlight. The sides were jagged like giant teeth. And it felt it. It felt warm. A strange heat radiated from it, as if it led down to the core of the moon itself. Standing at its edge, I felt this overwhelming sense of calm. The darkness was calling to me, promising me answers. If I only stepped forward, my feet moved on their own, leading me right to the edge. And that's when I heard it, a voice echoing up from the canyon's depths. It wasn't loud, but it filled the silence around me. It resonated deep in my chest. You do. I do not belong here. It was calm and sad. Who are you? I asked. I am what you call the moon, the voice replied. But I'm not just rock and dust. I am alive, in a way you cannot understand. Why are you telling me this? I found myself asking. I was drawn to the voice. Your kind seeks to walk upon my surface to claim me as a conquest, the signal. It was a warning. You are not welcome here. Not because I wish to harm you, but because you are not ready. Not ready for what? I asked for the truth that lies beyond your planet. There are things in this universe older and bigger than your minds can hold. You reach out with hands covered in blood and call it exploration. I felt defensive. I wanted to argue with him, but the voice continued. I do not blame you, Jim Marshall. You are driven by curiosity, a trait I admire. But listen to my warning. Some doors are closed for a reason. Do not open them. What are you protecting us from? I asked. I protect you from the darkness that even light cannot escape, from the past that should not be remembered. Your journey should be forward, not backward, into the shadows. There are other beings on Earth that you must not take to the stars. The voice faded, leaving me standing at the canyon's edge, the warmth from the canyon. It felt comforting now, like a gentle reminder of the conversation. The dream felt more real. That was the most waking moment I'd ever had. And when I finally woke up, the memory of it clung to me. I sat in my office, the early sun across the desk. I knew now what must be done. The mission had to be stopped. The moon had spoken, and I couldn't ignore it. Waking up from that dream, it felt like climbing out of one reality into another. There on my desk was a report. It was in my own handwriting, but I couldn't remember when I'd made it. It was a translation of the signal based on the symbols I'd collected. The logic was laid out so clearly. I wondered how I could have missed it for so long. It was all there in plain text. The message from the moon telling us to stay away. I grabbed the report and I made my way to the top brass at NASA. I had to tell them, show them what I'd found, what I'd written. Somehow I just knew that there was a meeting that day. I knew which conference room they would be in and that no one would stop me from getting there. I burst into the conference room to find the project heads, talking in hushed voices. "We can't go," I said, holding up the report. "We have to cancel the mission." They looked up at me like I'd lost my mind. I tried to explain, to make them see reason, but before I could get far, the room filled with the sound of the signal. Phones, computers, every electronic device started blaring it out louder and more piercing than ever. Dust, like the moon dust from my dream, started to gather in the corners of the room. And it wasn't just settling like regular dust. It swirled and thickened in corners as if it had a life of its own, as if it wanted to bury us in it. People clutched their ears in pain. As the sound overwhelmed us, everyone started to panic. They were holding their heads, trying to block out the noise, but they couldn't. The sound was everywhere. It was inside us, grinding against our skulls. And then, as if the sound flipped a switch, people began to drop. It was like watching dominoes fall, one after the other. People would clutch their heads, cry out, and then just collapse. Some tried to brace themselves on tables or walls, but down they went, slumping onto the floor in heaps. And then they'd start to bleed. It started as a small nosebleed here and there, but it got much worse quickly. The blood would start gushing from noses and ears. The contrast was shocking, that bright red against the harsh lights of the room. Panic turned into terror. The air was now thick with dust, and filled with the iron sin of blood. It was chaos pure and simple. And at the heart of it all was that ungodly noise. "Please," I begged. "You have to listen to me. The moon, it's warning us. We can't go there." For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The officials stared at me. The report in my hands was now stained with my own blood. The realization of what was happening finally seemed to break through to them. I saw NASA's chief executive officer nod his head, and as soon as he did, the room fell silent. The signal was just gone. The decision that followed was made in silence. It was a mutual, unspoken agreement that the launch could not proceed. After that meeting, it was clear we couldn't go forward. NASA had to pull the plug, but they couldn't tell the world the reason why. They said it was technical difficulties, which wasn't entirely a lie. Considering everything was breaking down around us, walking out of that room felt like stepping into a disaster movie. The control center, which was usually buzzing with activity, was silent, except for the occasional groan or whimper. People were scattered everywhere, some of them still unconscious. Others were trying to stop the blood. It was a real bad mess. I noticed the computers next. Screens were black, not even a flicker or cursor blinking. I tried flipping a few switches, pressing some power buttons, but nothing. Dead as doornails, all of them. And the wires, my God, the wires, they'd melted into the floor. Even fusing with the tiles, you could see where some had sparked and left scorch marks. The communication equipment wasn't much better. The radios, the satellite links, anything that could send a signal out or bring one in. It was fried. Handsets were hot to the touch, and the films were melted through. And then there was the dust. It was like a thin blanket had settled over everything. It gave the whole place an eerie, abandoned look. It coated the desks, the equipment, even the chairs. Every step I took kicked up little clouds of it floating in the air before settling back down. Everything that would have made the moon landing possible was either broken, bleeding, or buried under a layer of dust. It felt like we were cut off from the rest of the world, left alone in the aftermath of something that we didn't understand. But we all knew what had to be done. The cover-up, man. It was something out of a sci-fi flick. They roped in everyone who knew anything about space and movie magic. We had these big sets. They looked just like the moon's surface, all dusty and cratered. Scientists like me got pulled in to advise on how to make it look legit. They ran calculations on how the astronauts should move in low gravity. Oh, the astronauts. Yeah, they were in on it. They were forever sworn to secrecy. They were told to act out their part, bouncing around on wires to fake that moon gravity. It It was all filmed, then broadcasted as if it was happening live from the moon. They even planted a flag in the fake moon dust. And me? I was right there in the thick of it. I was suggesting tweaks to make it all look more convincing. Sometimes I'd wake up from more of those dreams where I was walking on the moon. The voice from the canyon would whisper these little details, like how to get the shadows just right or make the flag flutter without wind. I couldn't tell if those dreams were the moon actually speaking to me, or if I was losing my grip. But every suggestion from those dreams, it made the fake landing seem more real. And as the world was celebrating our one giant leap, I was in my office, dreaming about the moon. After everything that happened, I couldn't stay at NASA anymore. Faking the biggest achievement of human space exploration didn't sit right with me, even though we didn't really have a choice. I walked away, but I kept in touch with a few guys. They told me that some of the quarantine staff got better, like nothing ever happened. The lucky ones, well, they came out of it with total memory loss. They couldn't remember anything that happened in the weeks before. The official story was that there was a meningitis outbreak in the compound. NASA blamed it on some weird mold in the air vents. Over the years, I'd catch wind of new plans to communicate with what's out there, or to finally get boots on the moon for real this time. But like clockwork, something would always go wrong. Equipment failure, communication breakdowns, you name it. I also know that other countries with space programs had their sights set on the moon too. And sure, some of them would say that they've sent people up there, but I know all that was fake too. Nobody could make it work. And deep down, I knew why. That signal, it wasn't just for us. It was for everyone. Humanity is not welcome beyond Earth. My job usually isn't all that interesting, and that's the way I like it. I've done my time in the workforce. A lot of people my age are retired by now, but I never really had money to step out of the working world. My body isn't what it used to be, but at 60 I'd say I'm in better shape than most, and that keeps me employed. My name is Peter Summers, and I work for a security company. It's nothing fancy. They give me nighttime gigs guarding places that people don't want other people getting into. Usually it's abandoned buildings, empty lots, places that kids might break into so they can smoke pot or draw on the walls, or that squatters might try and call home. You might think that sounds at least a little exciting, but believe me when I say that it's not. There's some people I've worked with who had to deal with break-ins or looters, looking to see if anything of value was left behind. Some of them even dealt with people trying to strip the copper from abandoned buildings. Most of those kinds of people ran as soon as they were caught, but I've heard a few horror stories where some of the more determined ones got aggressive. As for me, the best action I've ever had was when I had to chase off a couple of teenagers trying to fool around in an old warehouse. And you know what? I like it that way. I've got no delusions of grandeur. I'm not looking to be a cop. I just want an easy way to keep some money coming in, and my job provides me just that. I'll usually just find a place to set up shop, bring my laptop, and watch movies in between patrols. The sound from the movies alone probably scares off anybody who thinks they can sneak in, and I go around the perimeter every hour or so to make sure nobody's around. As jobs go, I'd say I've got it pretty good. Well, for the most part now. If you're going to be alone in abandoned buildings all night, you best not be someone who scares easily. Me? I'm made of iron. The army saw to that. I don't think there's much on God's green earth that can spook me, aside from the voice of old Sergeant Henry. And I'm quite sure the old bastard is dead now, and I'm sure as hell not the sort to jump at shadows. But when something is truly off, well, that's another matter entirely. And I'd suspected there was something off with a place I've been watching for the past few weeks since day one. Now though, well, now I'm good and sure of it. My agency didn't give me many details on just what this place was. There were no special requirements or anything, no weird list of rules, just an address and a 6-month term. That was all I needed. It was well off the beaten path, a good way north of Winnipeg. Judging by the look of it, it was some sort of office building. Though it was in decent enough shape, I'd have figured the place was abandoned at a glance if it hadn't been for the lights that were always on the 5th floor. Back when I started, I just figured that somebody must have still been working there, and I was half right. I remember getting my first good look at the place on my first night. It was 5 stories tall and mostly dark, save for the aforementioned lights on the top floor. That was a little bit odd to me, but not all that surprising. Every now and then I'd be assigned to non-abandoned buildings. Honestly, so long as the money was good and I wasn't going to raise any complaints. But right from the get-go, something about this building seemed wrong. Hell, the building itself seemed a little out of place. It had been barely visible off the highway, and it was nowhere near any other offices that I knew of. It struck me as odd that someone would build a whole office so far out into the sticks. I wondered if maybe that was why whoever had owned it had ditched the place. I also recall thinking it was a little weird how there were no other cars in the parking lot. That might have made me dismiss the lights on the top floor as just some sort of fluke. If I hadn't later been corrected, I had been given a key card by my supervisor to let myself in. So I got in without any hassle and immediately pegged the empty reception desk as the ideal point to get myself set up. For a building like this, I would have expected some sort of corporate logo in the lobby, but instead it was blank. There was evidence that some sort of logo had been mounted on the wall above the reception area, but it had clearly been taken down. Come to think of it, I don't think a single piece of evidence indicating just what this place had been was still there. The place felt dead for all intents and purposes. The first thing that struck me as soon as I walked inside was the smell. It was a really strange odor that hung in the air, kind of like that smell you get right before it rains, although it was accompanied by a sort of burnt smell that came and went. It wasn't bad enough to be unbearable, but it was difficult not to notice. My first order of business after setting my things down was to head up to the 5th floor to check out those lights. The elevator came down just fine when I called it from the lobby, although when I stepped inside, nothing happened. I hit the button for the 5th floor and the doors closed, but I didn't feel the elevator move. The lights didn't flicker. There was no sign that anything was wrong, but after a moment of stillness, I felt just a little bit uneasy. It would have been one hell of a bad first night if I got myself trapped in the elevator, wouldn't it? That uneasy stillness passed quickly, though. Through what I thought had been the emergency phone on the elevator, I could hear a distinct crackle of static, as if someone was waiting on the other line. Then I heard a voice. "Who's down there?" "Name's Peter." "I'm with security," I replied. "Who's this?" "This is Diane," the voice replied. "I'm in accounting." "Sorry, we're a little backlogged. Is there something I can help you with?" "Accounting? So you're the ones up on the 5th floor, then?" "That's right. I apologize. I'm quite busy and my new office won't be ready for some time. I promise I won't be a bother." The voice over the intercom was distorted and had a strange echo to it. The fraying almost hurt my ears to listen to. I chalked it up to the intercom system being shit, although I wondered how the hell Diane from accounting had ever known I was in the elevator. "That's fine, I suppose. I think you've got a problem with your elevator, though. Doesn't seem to be working." "Oh. Access to the 5th floor is for executives only," she said. "My receptionist pinged you when you stepped inside. We've yet to move all of our documents out. That's usually done by the day crew. Until then, for security reasons, I can't allow anyone else up here." Maybe I could have challenged that. Looking back, that sounds like the kind of detail my supervisor would have mentioned, but Diane sounded legitimate enough. So long as she didn't cause me any troubles, I figured there was no need to cause her any trouble. "I see them. Well, I apologize for taking up your time then, ma'am. You have a nice evening." "Of course. You as well, sir." With that, Diane was gone. The intercom went dead, and I could still smell that burning ozone smell. It actually seemed just a little bit worse in the elevator. The doors swung open, revealing a lobby, and I stepped back out. There was a little cleaner out there, and I want to finish setting up shop at the old receptionist desk. I never saw Diane from accounting actually leave at any point during the first night I worked there, nor did I see anyone else coming out of the elevator. Truth be told, I didn't think too much about it until the next morning. The building was isolated enough that nobody was even around to bother me, and I passed my evening playing solitaire between rounds. The lights on the 5th floor were still on when I came in for my second night at the abandoned office. I remember looking up at them and remembering the voice I'd heard over the intercom the night before. Diane from accounting. I figured she was probably burning the midnight oil again and thought I'd be neighborly and say hello. Just as I had the night before, I set up my things and then went for the elevator. I hit the button for floor number 5 and waited, wondering if I'd get the same response I'd gotten before. Diane didn't keep me waiting for long. Her voice crackled out of that busted speaker, accompanied by the burnt smell as well. I was sure I'd gotten into a different elevator than before, but maybe they all had that problem. Good evening, Peter. Is there a problem? Straight to business. I wondered if my attempt to be friendly had irritated my new coworker. Just checking in. You're working late again. I'm afraid so. I'm a bit of a night owl. It's the only time I can get anything done. A night owl? Maybe that was why I'd never seen her leave. Was this lady seriously working from dusk till dawn? That swamp, I asked. I'm afraid so. But I suspect I'll be done soon enough. Another week, perhaps. I'm sorry, but if there's nothing else, I must get back to my work. Of course, of course. Don't let me keep you. The intercom went dead for a moment, and then the elevator doors opened. Although before I could take a step out, I heard the crackle of static again. Actually, could I trouble you about one thing? I paused and stepped back into the elevator. What do you need? I have a delivery coming tomorrow night. They don't come often, but I'm afraid they're necessary to complete my work. My courier usually comes at night. I'm unable to go down and meet him myself, so he has a key card. Since you're watching the building, I thought it best you be informed. That's very considerate of you. You mind if I ask what kind of delivery you're expecting? I'm not at liberty to say. Just trust that it is necessary to complete my work. There was something funny about the way she said necessary. The static around her voice grew deeper. All right, then. Suppose I'll send him up when I see him tomorrow. You take care now, I said. I left our conversation slightly more perplexed by this woman than I'd ever been before. She didn't strike me as unfriendly, just distant and a little intense. Not the sort for conversations or small talk. I think there are worse things for a person to be. Sure enough, the next night a truck rolled up and two folks in white rolled something on a cart off of it. One of them had his own key card, just as Diane had indicated he would, and I exchanged a nod with him as he came in, silently letting him know that he was expected. The man with the key card wheeled whatever was on the cart towards the elevator, and I couldn't help but stare down at whatever it was. It was long, maybe about 6 feet, and covered by some sort of hard plastic cover. The men moved it towards the elevator with a certain reverence, although only one of them actually went inside. The other waited by the elevator door and leaned against the wall before looking over at me, studying me. Did you know about this place or something? He asked. Something like that. I'm just here to keep the trouble out. It's been a few months since I've seen anyone here. I thought they ditched this place. He moved to light up a cigarette. I almost stopped him, but the building was empty, aside from us anyway. Who the hell was he going to offend? You've been making these kinds of deliveries for a long time? I asked. Yes and no. We had a pretty regular drop-off schedule out here a couple years back, although we were always headed into the basement. I actually thought they'd shut this place down around the time we stopped. My buddy said there'd been some sort of accident. Guess it wasn't that bad if they're still working here, though. We got a call a few months back, same setup, only now we take them up to the 5th floor. He said with a shrug, There's a basement. I asked, frowning. I hadn't seen any way to access it when I'd been in the elevator. Yeah, we used to get in through there. He gestured to a set of elevators on the other side of the lobby. The receptionist had let us in, though. I don't know if you'd have access. Considering how the desk I'd commandeered was empty, I doubted I did. Still, my eyes were drawn over towards the elevators the guy had gestured towards. He took a long drag of a cigarette and shook his head. You wouldn't happen to know what was in this building before it got shut down, would you? I asked, mostly to sate my own curiosity. Some sort of medical lab, I think. It's my best guess anyway. Not sure if they closed down for good or just moved someplace else. Not really my business, I suppose. The elevator doors beside the man opened, and his partner stepped out. The card he'd had and whatever had been on it were gone. He nodded at the smoking man before they headed back towards the door. Well, see you when I see you, the smoking man said. And just like that, he was gone. After they'd left, I poked around the elevators that he gestured to. I couldn't even find a way to open them, though. There was a pad that one might have been able to scan a card on, but the key card I had didn't work. Not sure there was any way I could have gone down into the basement, even if I wanted to. Maybe that was for the best. I might have gotten into trouble snooping around down there. Still, my curiosity was sparked. I tried the elevators I'd used before and tried heading up to the second floor. The elevator worked just fine. My mysterious friend upstairs didn't try to stop me, nor did she bother to ask what I was doing. The second floor wasn't anything special. The hallways were mostly bare, and the rooms I passed were all empty. Some had clearly once been offices or office spaces. Others, I wasn't so sure. There was one that looked as if it might have once been a boardroom or lunchroom, but I didn't see any furniture or cabinets. The hallways seemed to wind on forever, dead silent and empty. I've said before that I ain't the sort of man who scares easily. I stand by that. But no matter how tough a man is, wandering around completely alone in a place like that is going to make some of the hairs on the back of your neck stand straight up. That burnt ozone smell wasn't so bad up there, at least. Whatever was causing it seemed to mostly be in the elevator shaft. Once I was done with the second floor, I checked out the third and fourth floors as well, but I didn't spend nearly as much time on them. Just from the view I got from the elevators, I was relatively sure that there was nothing of interest to be seen there. They were just as empty as the rest of the building was. While I was up on the fourth floor, though, I caught a glimpse of a doorway to a stairwell nearby, just a hop and a skip away from the elevator doors. Actually, a wire-reinforced glass window looked out into an empty concrete stairwell and studied it. I got an idea that would probably get me into some shit, but the rambunctious bastard in me couldn't help but want to try it. Sure, my friend upstairs could keep the elevator from reaching the fifth floor, but she couldn't stop me from climbing the steps, could she? Hell, maybe the stairs would even lead me down into whatever basement there was if I followed him down. I had nothing to lose by checking it out. Besides, it was my job to do rounds through the building itself, wasn't it? Why not explore in the process? I opened the stairwell door and stepped inside. It was cold as hell in there, and that ozone smell was back, but it didn't bother me too much. I ascended the concrete steps, the sound of my own footprints echoing off the walls as I made my way up to the fifth floor. I'll admit, part of me just wanted to meet my friend up there face to face. While I had no real reason to doubt that she was who she said she was, I was still curious. I could see the door to the fifth floor just above me. The air felt colder and colder as I got higher and higher, and through the small window and the door, I could see a hallway that looked identical to the others I'd seen on the other floors. Only this one wasn't entirely empty. I could see the cart the courier had brought upstairs sitting by the elevator. I looked through the glass, watching for some sign of life other than the cart, but I didn't see anything. The lights were on in the hallway, but nobody was really there. That burning ozone smell seemed so much stronger than it had been downstairs. Maybe the source was up here. I tried the door. The knob wouldn't even turn. The door didn't budge. Somebody had locked it from the other side. I gave it a push, but had no further luck. And then from the corner of my eye, I saw her. Or at least I think I saw her. I hadn't seen her enter the hallway, so maybe she'd always been there. Either that, or she moved like a cat. I only saw her from the back, a woman in a black coat with shoulder-length pitch black hair. She stood over the cart, as if she was about to open and examine it, but her body seemed tense. Her hands looked starkly white against her coat, and I wondered for a moment if she was wearing gloves. Her fingers looked black near the tips, and I was sure I could see something dripping off her fingers. And, well, maybe this was just my imagination, but her hands almost looked broken, like cracked porcelain. It was hard to be sure. At the sound of my attempts to open the door, I saw her head turn slightly. I didn't get a good look at her face, but I could see that her skin was pale and white. I blinked, but as soon as I did, she was gone. The cart sat in front of the elevator, as if it hadn't even been touched, and yet I was sure I could see pools of something dark on the surface. I stared through the window for a moment longer, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, before turning to head back down the stairs. Usually, the simplest answer is the right one. That was probably Diane I'd seen. She'd stepped out of her office to look at the package and gone back in. Simple, right? But something didn't sit right with me. So much had seemed wrong with just those few seconds that I'd seen her, and that left me with an uneasy feeling that I didn't like. The next day, before I went in, I put in a call to my supervisor. I only got his receptionist, but I left her a message to ask him about anyone still working in that building I was in. I felt a little paranoid for even asking. No doubt he was going to get back to me in a few days and tell me that there were some people on the 5th floor and not to worry about it. Then I could get on with my work, but it still made me feel better to at least ask. The next few days went by without anything of note happening. I'd get in, set myself up, and sit in the lobby, passing the time as I waited out my shift. If Diane had any problem with me trying to get up to the 5th floor, she never said anything to me about it. Then again, I hadn't tried using the elevator to get up to the 5th floor again, and she never tried to contact me in any other way. The only way I ever knew she was up there was because I still saw the lights on the 5th floor. I tried to access the basement, but the stairwell didn't lead down there, and I could find no way to open up those elevators. I wasn't that bothered by it. Disappointed, but not bothered. As I said before, it was probably for the best. Curiosity can often get us into trouble, and whatever was down there, probably more empty rooms, probably wasn't worth the trouble. About a week after I'd first started, the second delivery came. It was the same two guys in the same truck dropping off a cart, almost exactly the same as the first one they brought, although this time there were two carts, not just one. Just like before, the man with the key card rolled his cart into the elevator and got in. His friend leaned against the wall with a second cart and lit up a cigarette before giving me a nod. "Still here?" he asked. "Were you expecting somebody else?" "Not happy to see a familiar face for a change. This place has been creeping me out lately. Too quiet, you know. I don't know how you stick around here. I can't imagine that the doc is all that social." "The doc?" I asked. "The lady upstairs?" Yeah, Dr. Cooper. Something. No, not Cooper. Carter. No, it'll come back to me. Anyway, the lady ordered the cadavers." "Cadavers?" I felt a strange sensation in my stomach as I looked over at the cart beside the smoking man. "Cadavers?" I repeated. "As in, dead people, yeah. We mostly drop them off at universities or hospitals for medical training." I kept staring at the covered cart, feeling a growing sense of unease as I realized that there was a dead human body in there. The smoking man exhaled a plume of smoke and chuckled. "You know, my girlfriend says if I keep smoking like this, then I'm going to end up a cadaver. So long as they don't drop me off at a place like this, I don't care." I couldn't focus my mind long enough to reply to him. I just kept staring at that cart and thinking about the corpse inside. And then I couldn't help but start wondering what the hell an accountant needs cadavers for. "What's with the look?" the smoking man asked. "What? You didn't know these were?" "No," I replied quietly. "No, I didn't." Yeah, I guess that is a little creepy then. I don't suppose you got any idea what that woman is using those cadavers for, do you?" He shrugged. "None of my business," he said, and as he spoke, the elevator doors opened beside him. His associate wheeled the second cart into the elevator and was gone again. I watched it go before looking back towards the smoking man. "Do you or your partner ever actually see the doctor?" I asked. Maybe it was a dumb question, but it was the one that came to mind. Not recently, no. My partner just leaves the carts by the elevator. I think I met her once or twice a few years back. At least I think I did." He shrugged again, before taking a thoughtful drag on his cigarette. "I don't suppose you talk to her much, do you?" "Only a few times. I don't think we've ever been formally introduced," I replied. "Yeah, that sounds about right. I got the impression she wasn't much of a people person." Another drag on his cigarette. The elevator opened again, and his partner stepped out. He nodded at the smoking man before they both left. "See you later, alligator," the smoking man said as they left me alone again. I considered trying to get into the elevator myself and trying to make it up to the 5th floor. Maybe Dr. Diane would think her couriers were still there and let me up. Something told me, though, that she'd know better. I didn't try it. It was too late to call my supervisor, and I wasn't sure what I'd even bitch to him about. Hey boss, the accountant upstairs keeps buying cadavers. Do something about it. I'm not sure there's a way to phrase that doesn't sound completely batshit insane. He still hung on back to me about Diane being there in the first place, and up until then I just sort of figured that no news was good news. Now I wasn't so sure anymore. Despite my suspicions about the place, I kept going in. I never bothered to try and ask Diane herself about just what she was doing upstairs. I doubted I'd get a straight answer out of her anyway. It had been over a week since I'd last actually spoken to her, and something told me that she wasn't interested in regular social calls. I did consider camping out in the lobby until the early hours of the morning and watching to see when she came down to leave. My shifts were long enough as it was, though, and the commute to the building was already a bitch. Sticking around for 12 to 14 hours to try and catch another glimpse of this woman just didn't seem worth it. So, despite my reservations, I kept to my schedule. The nights were quiet enough, despite the strange aura that the place gave off, and aside from the occasional whiff of that burning ozone smell, there wasn't really anything to disturb me. Not until the night that van showed up anyway. It must have been around 1 in the morning when I noticed the black van pulling into the parking lot. Now, I'd only been there for about a week and a half at that point, but I hadn't seen a single vehicle in that parking lot, aside from the truck that dropped off the cadavers, and this sure as hell wasn't them. I paused the show I was playing on my laptop and got up to stand by the door and investigate. The van had no logos on it, and the people who got out didn't look like they were working for anybody. Most of them looked young and scrawny. The guy who got out of the driver's seat in particular looked malnourished and bony. My first instinct told me that it was a bunch of teenagers looking for a place to party, but these folks seemed a little too old and too scruffy to be teenagers. I watched as one of them threw open the back of the van and took out some sort of toolkit, and as they did, I pushed open the door and stepped out. Hey, I called. Excuse me, you're on private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. That bony bastard who'd gotten out of the driver's seat looked over at me with an expression that made it clear he couldn't have cared less about what I had to say. Getting closer to him, I saw his arms were marked with scabs and scars. He looked like he'd been shooting up the better half of his life. I'm sorry, man. I'm just stopping for a moment. Don't worry about it. Can you please move your car out of the parking lot? Again, this is private property. That scrawny guy was getting closer to me, smiling as if nothing was wrong. I should have seen the haymaker coming from a mile away. Maybe 10 years ago I might have. As soon as I was in range, he let loose on me and boxed me so hard my ears were ringing. And then that junky bastard kicked me square in the teeth before I could get up, and I tasted blood. My vision blacked out for a moment, but I could still hear him yelling to his buddies. Come on, move your asses, let's go. I heard him say, damn, this place is a gold mine. We're not going to get it in one night. Then just get where you can. Just move. Man, Randy, you've laid that guy out. The voices of those people sounded distant. I tried to pick myself up and looked up to see the driver standing over me. He grabbed me by the shirt and lifted me up to prop me against the van. I felt him reaching into my pocket to take out my phone. He slipped it into his pocket with a grin. You just sit tight, old-timer. We ain't gonna be long, he said cheerfully. I spotted the glint of a knife in his hand. The threat was obvious, although he didn't look like he had any real interest in using it on me. No need to turn whatever this was into a murder, right? Most likely they were after copper or whatever they could steal from that old place. Considering that one of them had just laid my ass out, I wasn't in the mood to play hero and try to stop him. The punk who'd hit me looked back over towards the building. I could see the light on the 5th floor flicker for a moment. I thought I saw the shape of a person at the window, although it might have just been my imagination. I spit out some blood and let myself rest. I never full-on got my ass kicked at this job before. I wasn't happy about it. Not one bit. But there wasn't much I could do about it either. And then I heard the screaming. Both me and Punk looked up at the same time. I spotted a bunch of his friends tripping over themselves as they ran through the front door, blindly running back to the van. What the hell? The Punk snapped, but nobody gave him an answer. They didn't need to. It was hard to see her clearly from where I sat, but I could see the pale shape of a woman in a long black coat standing in the doorway. Her face seemed entirely white, although her eyes seemed pitch black. That smell of burning ozone seemed to follow her. I'd never smelled it outside before, but right then in that moment, I could smell it. The punk seemed to tense up, his teeth gritted, and he took a defiant step forward. Maybe he thought he could intimidate her with his little switchblade. Maybe he was going to try and rough her up. "Who the hell are you?" he said as he drew closer. The woman didn't respond. She just stood there, waiting for him, watching him. I could see the punk's footsteps faltering as he got closer to her, as if he saw something that unnerved him. "What the hell?" he said quietly. "Lady, what the hell's wrong with your face?" She took a step forward. The punk leapt back a step, holding up the knife as if it might defend him. "Hey, you get back." Another step forward. This time the punk stood his ground. "I'm warning you, lady. Get back." Another step forward. This one is bigger. She was almost close enough to touch him, and I heard the punk scream. I saw him bring up the knife. It was probably a panic response, trying to hurt her before she could hurt him. I'm not sure I knew what to expect next. Even if I had, I probably still would have been caught off guard. There was a sudden pop and a blinding flash like a mosquito running into a bug zapper. I thought I heard the punk scream, but if I did, it was cut off before the sound could fully exit his mouth. One minute he was there, the next he wasn't, and all I could smell was burning. I could hear his friends screaming. I could see them running for the van. I shifted myself away from it before they sped out of the parking lot at top speed. Part of me almost wished they'd taken me with him. Instead, it was just me. And whoever had been up on the 5th floor, Diane the doctor, whatever she was really called, she stood a few feet away from me, watching as the van drove away, and then she was gone. All I needed to do was blink, and the spot where she'd been standing was empty again, as if she'd never even been there in the first place. The only sign that she had was that lingering smell of burning, and even that was quick to fade. I had no phone to call the cops. Even if I had, by the time I'd picked myself up and returned to my desk, I wasn't sure it would have been worthwhile to try. What'd I tell them? Trying to explain what I'd just seen felt impossible. They would have probably dismissed me as some rambling old man. I wasn't entirely sure I hadn't finally completely lost my marbles. I didn't stay for the whole shift that evening. Nobody was going to stop me from leaving. So that's exactly what I did, and I had half a mind the next day to call my supervisor and tell him to get someone else to watch over that place. I didn't, though. No, I woke up the next morning with a shiner, headache, and no idea just what the hell I'd really seen. But I did know one thing. I'm sure my friend upstairs probably wouldn't have given much of a shit if some thugs had stripped the downstairs for copper. Maybe if they screwed with the wires, she might have had a problem. But I got the feeling that wasn't why she'd come down. She must have seen me on the ground and shown up to help in her own way. Whatever her deal was, I felt I at least owed her a thank you. That was one of the reasons I came back the next night, if not the main one. Just like I had before, I entered the elevator when I got in. I hit the button for the 5th floor and waited. As expected, the intercom crackled to life. "It's good to see you back, Peter." Diane's voice was calm as usual. The static seemed a little better, too. "It wouldn't have felt right to not thank you for stepping in last night," I said. "You mind if I ask just what the hell you did to that junkie, though?" "I do, actually. I apologize for that mess last night. It's something I prefer to avoid." "No shit," I murmured. Never met an accountant who could do shit like that before. But then again, I don't suppose you really are an accountant, are you? There was silence on the other end of the intercom, but the static told me that she was still there. "No," she finally said, "but I'd rather not discuss the nature of my work. It's complicated, difficult to talk about with strangers. I assure you, though, that I'm almost done here. I suppose you're fortunate that I didn't finish early. I don't expect to be here tomorrow night. So then I shouldn't bank on you being here if anyone else shows up then. I'm afraid not. I'm sorry for that. But perhaps your employer will see fit to provide you company in the future. I do hope so. This place is rather lonely." Even just the knowledge that someone else is present is nice. It makes the work easier. Was that the slightest hint of sentimentality I heard in her voice? I almost laughed. Good to know you like my company, I suppose. Well, if it's your last night, maybe I owe you a drink then, if you want to come down and claim it. That's a tempting offer, but I'm afraid I can't. If that offer stays open, though, one day I may take you up. One day. I wasn't sure what you meant by that, but I told her it would be. And that was the last time we ever spoke. The next night, when I went into the elevator and tried to go up to the 5th floor, nobody stopped me. The intercom didn't come alive with a crackle of static. The elevator simply did its job and took me up. I wasn't sure what to expect when the doors opened. Probably nothing. Half of me expected the place to just be as cleaned out as the rest of the building had been. That ozone smell was still there, but fainter than I'd expected it to be. Most of the offices seemed empty, save for the empty carts that had once housed the cadavers that Diane had ordered. That said, I didn't see a single trace of any dead bodies. There was that burnt odor that lingered in the air, sort of like the one I'd smelled when that punk had disappeared. I tried not to think too hard on what it meant. In one room, I found what looked like a makeshift office. There were computers set up, although I couldn't get any of them to work. They looked like they'd been disabled somehow. I also found some sort of broken casing. I could just barely make out the words Psinkvi on the side of it, but just what that meant was beyond me. Whatever it was, it had been disassembled, and judging by the disconnected wires and nodes, some sort of vital component was missing. Maybe it was wrong to snoop like that, but I had to satisfy my curiosity somehow. My supervisor eventually got back to me regarding my inquiry about Diane. According to him, that whole building was meant to be abandoned. There was no accountant named Diane up on the 5th floor, but I'd long since figured that part out on my own already. I just put in a request for some company and filed a report on the incident the other day, although one that excluded some minor details. I still don't know what that woman was doing up there. I don't think I'll ever know. And personally, I don't think it's my business. I can't help but wish her the best, though. Whatever she was looking to accomplish, I hope she gets it sorted out. And if she does, I hope to run into her again. I'm sure she's got stories more interesting than mine to tell.